Hey everyone, welcome back to Big Strong Book. I am Reed, and today we will be reading Roberto Bolaño's short story, Mauricio the Eye Silva, from his short story collection, Last Evenings on Earth. So, this short story is dark. I don't even know if dark is the word to accurately describe this story. It is brutal. It is horrifying. And yet, as is the style of Bolaño as we have gone through these short stories, the narrator is removed. We're experiencing this horror, this visionary terror secondhand. When I was reading this short story, I was reminded a lot of Cormac McCarthy, who is probably my favorite author. I've read all of his novels, and of course, everybody has at least heard of Blood Meridian, his novel that takes place in the American Southwest in the mid-19th century that deals with, scalp hunters sanctioned by the US government in northern Mexico. And it's just very brutal. And, the unspeakable things that they do to men, women, and children, and the things that characters like the judge in that book talk about. They give these long soliloquies and monologues about violence and the nature of war and, the necessity of war. I think the judge says at one point in Blood Meridian, war is God. That, that is the deity that humans know. And this story is Bolaño taking a hard swing in that direction. He doles out his usual dreary despair of the individual, and again, he's at the wheel and he cranks it full to the right. So I'll just read the first paragraph of the story and then I'll jump into it. Mauricio Silva, also known as the Eye, always tried to avoid violence, even at the risk of being considered a coward. But violence, real violence, is unavoidable, at least for those of us who were born in Latin America during the 50s and were about 20 years old at the time of Salvador Allende's death. That's just the way it goes. The case of the Eye is paradigmatic and exemplary, and it may well be worth recalling, especially now that so many years have passed. So, Mauricio Silva is a Chilean, and he travels to Mexico where he meets the narrator. And the Eye, he confesses to the narrator that he is gay. And so they kind of have a conversation about that. And then the Eye travels to Europe, and the narrator doesn't see him again for many, many years, until the narrator himself is in Europe, and he comes across the Eye, named the Eye. He is a photographer, so, he has an eye for things. That's kind of what that nickname represents. And so the Eye starts to tell the narrator about a period of his life that had just happened, where he was in India. He was in India on assignment, and while he was in a big city, he, let me just look through the story again just to make sure I have all of the details correct. And yeah, so it says in the afternoons, he went to the red light district, took photos and talked with the prostitutes, some of whom were very young and beautiful, while others were older or more faded with the air of skeptical, laconic matrons. So, he's taking pictures in these red light districts in this city, and the Eye isn't really even sure what city he is. He seems to ignore the question, so it could be, Bombay, Calcutta. And so he's in this city, and some of the pimps approach him, and they discover that he's gay, and so they kind of point him in the direction of this brothel that has young men, and by young men, it's very, very young men. And he's kind of, obviously he's disgusted by it, seeing these like 10-year-old boys in there. But then he starts to talk to the narrator about this ceremony or this tradition that he witnesses. And I'll read this. So, "It is customary in some parts of India," said the eye, looking at the ground, "to offer a young boy to a deity whose name I can't remember. I regret to say that here I interrupted to point out that as well as having forgotten the name of the deity, he couldn't remember the name of the city or any of the people in his story. The eye looked at me and smiled. 'I've tried to forget,' he said." So what happens is the boy that is selected to almost be sacrificed, they're not killed, but these like 7-year-old boys are castrated. And that's the festival, the ceremony that the eye witnesses. And again, he is just so horrified by what he sees, because then these boys become prostitutes and they live in the brothel, and they become eunuchs and their families abandon them and they're shunned. And you're reading this and you're horrified too, reading this, thinking, oh my God. And eventually, what he tries to do is it says, "What the eye saw was a drowsy, tearful child. The eunuch was still at his side with a half-amused, half-terrified look at his face. Then the eye was transformed into something else, although the expression he used was not something else, but mother. 'Mother,' he said and sighed. 'At last, mother.'" He becomes a mother figure to a couple of the eunuchs, and he tries to flee with them. And he is under the paranoia that they're being chased by the Indian police authorities. And they create, he gets a farm, and he tries to, teach them his language. He tries to communicate with them, but he can't understand, it says, a word of the language they spoke to each other, the boys. And eventually, so it says, apparently no one had reported the incident at the brothel. This news did not put an end to the eye's nightmares. The characters who came to arrest and brutalize him simply changed their clothes. Instead of policemen, now they were thugs from the sect of the castrated god. Then the disease came to the village and the boys died. I wanted to die too, said the eye, but I wasn't that lucky. And he witnesses this. He witnesses this violence. And he has to go on living. And he just starts crying. And that's how the story ends. And Bolaño is clearly talking about kind of the inexplicably brutal things that exist in the world, the inexplicably brutal things that we might witness during our lifetimes. And again, that there are, similar to McCarthy and Blood Meridian, that there are things that go on in this world that we will never fully comprehend, nor that we will ever fully understand. These things that are so terrible. And it's just awful, and that's the thing, and they leave Chile, I believe, to escape political violence, and yet you can never escape violence. Violence it's almost like it's part of the human condition in the worst possible way. And that's kind of what Bolaño says. But again, his narration style is so interesting because it is so removed. The narrator is physically removed, and he's hearing this story secondhand. And because the eye is leaving out these details, intentionally trying to forget them to kind of block out the memory from his mind, the narrator is, even though he's getting such a brutal version of the story, is probably a watered down version of what really happened. It's just, it's awful. that's really all I have to say about this story. So, yeah, if you've read it, let me know what you think, I guess. Again, this is just, it's a horrifying story. I guess that's all you can say about it. So, until next time, with the next Bolaño story, leave a like, subscribe below. So, yeah, I'll see you guys soon for the next Bolaño video.